Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. This evening I want to go through a sutta that I find very interesting. It's the Aggañña Sutta, number 27 of the Digha Nikaya. It's the Sutta of Origins. Pretty much every religion or belief system in the world has a creation story of one kind or another, or an origin story. And this is the Buddhist version. It's a little different from most of the other creation stories in that it's not creation story. There's no creator, but it's a story of origins, and it's not an ultimate origin either, because there is no beginning to samsara. However far back you go in time, there's always a yesterday. So there's no ultimate beginning, but this is the beginning of our world system, and the beginning of the human race, and the beginning of human government and society. It has a number of interesting features we'll highlight as we go. The title of the sutta, Aggañña, I think it's probably cognate with the name of the first book of the Bible, which is Genesis, which is a Greek word. Pali and Greek are both Indo-European languages, so gan or gen is probably the common element here. So we'll begin. I'll read it and stop now and again to make a commentary. Thus have I heard, which is Ewang Me Sutang, that's how most of the suttas start. That's Ananda speaking at the first council. Thus have I heard, once the Lord was staying at Sawati, at the mansion of Migara's mother in the East Park. At that time, Vasata and Bharadvaja were living among the monks, hoping to become monks themselves. And in the evening the Lord rose from his secluded meditation and came out of the mansion and started walking up and down in the shade. Vasata noted this, and he said to Bharadvaja, Friend Bharadvaja, the Lord has come out and is walking up and down. Let us approach him. We might be fortunate enough to hear a talk on Dhamma from the Lord himself. Yes, indeed, said Bharadvaja. So they went up to the Lord and saluted him and fell in step with him. Then the Lord said to Vasata, Vasata, you too are Brahmins, born and bred, and you have gone forth from the household life into homelessness from Brahmin families. Do not the Brahmins revile and abuse you? Indeed, Lord, the Brahmins do revile and abuse us. They don't hold back with their usual flood of reproaches. Well, Vasata, what kind of reproaches do they fling at you? Lord, what the Brahmins say is this. The Brahmin caste is the highest caste. Other castes are base. The Brahmin caste is fair. Other castes are dark. Brahmins are purified. Non-Brahmins are not. The Brahmins are the true children of Brahma, born from his mouth, born of Brahma, created by Brahma, heirs of Brahma. And you have deserted the highest class and gone over to the base class of shaveling petty ascetics, servants, dark fellows, born of Brahma's foot. It is not right, it is not proper for you to mix with such people. This is the way the Brahmins abuse us, Lord. So it starts out with the Buddha in conversation with these two Brahmins, and a indication of Brahmin caste pride and arrogance. And this is one of the themes of the sutta, is to undermine the Brahmin pretensions. And this is one interpretation that the Buddhist scholar Gombrich has written about this sutta, that the whole thing is kind of a parody of the Brahmins. I think that's a bit strong. I think there's a lot more in this sutta, but that's certainly one aspect here, this critique of the Brahmin view. Thus, Vaseta, the Brahmins have forgotten their ancient tradition when they say that. This is the Buddha speaking. Because we can see Brahmin women, the wives of Brahmins, who menstruate and become pregnant, have babies and give suck. And yet these womb-born Brahmins talk about being born from Brahma's mouth. These Brahmins misrepresent Brahma, tell lies, and earn much demerit. So the Buddha is mocking the Brahmin's pretension, who says that the Brahmins come from Brahma's mouth. The myth in the Vedic tradition was that the creation of the world, the 4 castes emerged from the body of Brahma, who was the supreme God. This is one of the creation myths found in the pre-Buddhist literature. There are other versions. And the Brahmins, the highest caste, emerged from Brahma's mouth. The Kshatriya, or the warrior caste, from his shoulders. The Vaisya, or merchant class, from his belly. And the Sudras, or working class, from his feet. And the Buddha is saying, I know Brahmins, and they didn't come from Brahma's mouth. They came from their mother in the ordinary way. And then the Buddha goes on, there are Vaseta these 4 castes, the Katyas, the Brahmas, the merchants, and the artisans. And sometimes a Katya takes life, takes what is not given, commits sexual misconduct, tells lies, indulges in slander, harsh speech or idle chatter, is grasping, malicious, of wrong view. Thus such things as are immoral and considered so, blameworthy and considered so, to be avoided and considered so, ways unbefitting an Aryan and considered so, black with black result, and blamed by the wise, are sometimes to be found among the Katyas, and the same applies to the Brahmins, merchants, and artisans. One thing to note here is that the Buddha changes the order of the castes, and this is consistent throughout. Whenever the Buddha speaks about castes, he always puts the Katyas or Kshatriyas at the top position, the Brahmins in second position. And he identifies here being an Aryan with good behavior rather than with birth. Sometimes too, a Katya refrains from taking life, is not grasping, malicious, or of wrong view. Thus such things as are moral and considered so, blameless and considered so, to be followed and considered so, ways befitting an Aryan and considered so, bright with bright results, and praised by the wise, are sometimes to be found among the Katyas, and likewise among the Brahmins, merchants, and artisans. Now, since both dark and bright qualities, which are blamed and praised by the wise, are scattered indiscriminately amongst the 4 castes, the wise do not recognize the claim about the Brahmin caste being the highest. Why is that? Because, Vaseta, anyone from the 4 castes who becomes a monk, an arahant, who has destroyed the corruptions, who has lived the life, done what has to be done, laid down the burden, reached the highest goal, destroyed the fetter of becoming, and become emancipated through super knowledge. He is proclaimed supreme by virtue of Dhamma and not of non-Dhamma. Then there's a stanza of verse, Dhamma is the best thing for people in this life and the next as well. This illustration made clear to you how Dhamma is best in this world and the next. King Pasenadi of Kosala knows the ascetic Gotama has gone forth from the neighboring clan of the Sakyans. Now the Sakyans are vassals of the king of Kosala. They offer him humble service and salute him, rise and do homage and pay him fitting service. And just as the Sakyans offer the king humble service, so likewise does the king offer humble service to the Tathagata, thinking, if the ascetic Gautama is well born, I am ill born. If the ascetic Gautama is strong, I am weak. If the ascetic Gautama is pleasant to look at, I am ill-favored. If the ascetic Gautama is influential, I am of little influence. Now it is because of honoring the Dhamma, making much of the Dhamma, esteeming the Dhamma, doing reverent homage to the Dhamma, that King Pasenadi does humble service to the Tathagata and pays him fitting service. Dhamma is the best thing for people in this life and the next as well. Vaseta, all of you, though of different birth, name, clan, and family, who have gone forth from the household life into homelessness, if you are asked who you are, should reply, we are ascetics, followers of the Sakyan. He whose faith in the Tathagata is settled, rooted, established, solid, unshakable by any ascetic or Brahmin, any Deva or Mara or Brahma or anyone in the world, can truly say, I am a true son of the Blessed One, born of his mouth, born of the Dhamma, created by Dhamma, an heir of the Dhamma. Why is that? Because, Vaseta, this designates the Tathagata, the body of Dhamma, that is the body of Brahma, or become Dhamma, that is become Brahma. So Brahma was considered the supreme deity, and the Buddha is saying here that the Tathagata and the Dhamma and Brahma are all being somewhat equated. So one who has gone forth into the dispensation of the Buddha can claim to be born of the mouth of the Buddha, and metaphorically, because he's following the teachings spoken by the Buddha. And then this is the kind of the introductory portion of the sutta, where the Buddha establishes that he's critiquing the Brahmin caste pride and caste pretensions. And then he goes on in the next section to deal with the origin of the world system with a quite different mythological basis than that found in the Vedas. Now, I'd like to say something about the value of myth. I can't remember who said it, but somebody said once, and it struck me as very good, that there are things that are true, but they're not real. And there are things that are real, but they're not true. So there are people in the world who have a attitude towards mythological stories or content that they're of no value. They say, well, it's not true, it didn't happen, so what's the use of learning it or hearing it? And there are other people, not so many nowadays, but there are other people who want to take all the mythological content literally, and either approach is very narrow and misguided. Myths can express very profound truths without being real in the sense of like a real historical event. And this myth, I think, has a lot to say about the nature of the world and the nature of beings. So he begins, there comes a time, Vaseta, when sooner or later, after a long period, this world contracts. At the time of contraction, beings are mostly born in the Abhisara Brahma world. So what he's talking about here is the long cycle of the cosmology. Multiple world systems go through phases of contraction and expansion. And during contraction phase, worlds are destroyed. And if they are destroyed by fire, which is most of the cycles, majority of the cycles, the worlds are destroyed by fire, it destroys everything up to the first Brahma level. And the lowest world system that's left is the second jhana level of the Abhisara Brahmas. And everything below that, the human realm and the realms of the Devas and the realms of the first jhana Brahmas, they're all destroyed by fire. And that's the contraction of the world system. It's destroyed from the bottom up. And then it comes back into being from the top down. That's the expansion of the world system. So there comes a time, Vaseta, when this world contracts. At a time of contraction, beings are mostly born in the Abhisara Brahma world. The Abhisara Brahmas are the glorious, luminous Brahmas of the level of the second jhana. And all the beings from the lower realms are mostly born into that, because that's the lowest spot they could be born. And the Abhisara Brahma's consciousness is the equivalent of second jhana, which is marked by the factors of rapture and bliss, but without thought conception. And there they dwell, mind-made, feeding on the light, self-luminous, moving through the air, glorious. And that's a formula that occurs often in description of these Brahmas. Mind-made, manomaya, feeding on the light, which is a pitibhaka, feeding on piti. So they don't eat ordinary food, they feed on jhanic bliss. Self-luminous, moving through the air, glorious. And they stay like that for a very long time. But sooner or later, after a very long period, this world begins to expand again. At a time of expansion, the beings from the Abhisara Brahma world, having passed away from there, are mostly reborn in this world. Here they dwell, mind-made, feeding on the light, self-luminous, moving through the air, glorious. And they stay like that for a very long time. So, when the lifespan of the Abhisara Brahmas reaches its end, they're reborn. But initially, their form is very much the same, but they're reborn in the presence of this physical earth, not in the Brahma world. At this period, Vaseta, there was just one mass of water, and all was darkness, blinding darkness. Neither moon nor sun appeared. And that Pali there would be moon or sun is not evident. It doesn't say they didn't exist, but they were not evident, or they were not manifested, not perceived. No constellations or stars appeared. Night and day were not distinguished, nor months and fortnights, nor seasons and years. And no male and female beings just being recognized as beings. And sooner or later, after a very long period of time, savory earth, that is Oja in Pali, spread itself over the waters where those beings were. It looked just like the skin that forms itself over hot milk as it cools. It was endowed with color, smell, and taste. It had the color of fine ghee or butter, and it was very sweet, like pure wild honey. So there's some really interesting parallels here to the modern scientific cosmological conception of the early Earth, that it was dark, covered in heavy cloud cover. It was unformed, and the entire surface of the Earth was covered in ocean. And it said that at some point there appeared on the surface of the water this oja, nutritious foam. Then some being of a greedy nature said, I say, what can this be? And he tasted the savory earth on its finger. In so doing, it became taken with the flavor, and craving arose in it. Then other beings, taking their cue from this one, also tasted the stuff with their fingers. They too were taken with the flavor, and craving arose in them. So they set to it with their hands, breaking off pieces of the stuff in order to eat it. And the result of this was that their self-luminance disappeared. And as a result of the disappearance of their self-luminance, the sun and moon appeared, night and day were distinguished, months and fortnights appeared, and the years and seasons. To this extent, the world re-evolved. So this is a very critical paragraph and a critical transition. And there is here a interesting parallel with the story of Genesis in the Bible, because the fall, the initial fall, is due to the sense of taste and the desire for the apple in the Garden of Eden, or in here the Brahmas wanting to taste the oja. So it also indicates that these beings had already fallen spiritually from their initial state, because a Brahma god doesn't have any sensual desire, and doesn't indeed have even a sense of taste. So they had already fallen to some lower state to even take an interest in the oja. But once they take the taste of the oja, then they fall. They're no longer these luminous beings floating in the air, but they fall to earth. And this, to me, I see this as symbolic of consciousness entering into physical matter, or coarse, gross matter. There's a kind of fine matter in the Brahma realms, but here we have like a refined level of consciousness descending into the sense desire level. Consciousness becoming entangled in the material world. And those beings continued for a very long time, feasting on this savory earth, feeding on it and becoming nourished by it. And as they did so, their bodies became coarser, and a difference in looks developed among them. Some became good-looking, others ugly. And the good-looking ones despised the others, saying, "We are better looking than they are." And because they became arrogant and conceited about their looks, the savory earth disappeared. At this they came together and lamented, crying, "Oh, that flavor! Oh, that flavor!" So nowadays when people say, "Oh, that flavor," when they get something nice, they are repeating an ancient saying without realizing it. So that was probably some cliche or catchphrase that was common at the time, "Oh, that flavor, oh, that flavor." And here is kind of a just so story explaining how this is actually a very ancient phrase. We see here also in the first of several stages of devolution of these beings that it's very tied in with morality. The state of refinement of these beings is tied in with their moral behavior. So once they develop arrogance and conceit about their good looks, then they begin, that's the first stage of them declining. And we also have the beginning of differentiation as some of them become better looking than others. And we also have the decline of the food supply, or the devolution of the food supply together with the devolution of the beings. And then when the savory earth had disappeared, a fungus cropped up in the manner of a mushroom. It was of good color, smell, and taste. It was the color of fine ghee or butter, and it was very sweet, like pure wild honey. And those beings set to and ate the fungus, and this lasted for a very long time. And as they continued to feed on the fungus, so their bodies became coarser still, and the difference in their looks increased still more. And the good-looking ones despised the others. And because they became arrogant and conceited about their looks, the sweet fungus disappeared. And next creepers appeared, shooting up like bamboo, and these too were very sweet, like pure wild honey. And these beings set to and fed on the creepers, and as they did so, their bodies became even coarser, and the difference in their looks increased still more, and they became still more arrogant, and so the creepers disappeared too. And at this they came together and lamented, crying, "Alas, our creepers gone! What have we lost?" And so nowadays when people being asked why they are upset say, "Oh, what we have lost," they are repeating an ancient saying without knowing it. Then after the creepers had disappeared, rice appeared in the open spaces, free from powder and husks, fragrant and clear-grained. And what they had taken in the evening for supper had grown again and was ripe in the morning. And what they had taken in the morning for breakfast was ripe again in the evening, with no sign of reaping. So this kind of a first appearance of grain, of rice, and at the early times it grew already like white rice, ready to cook, and whatever they picked in the morning was back again by the evening. And the beings set to and fed on the rice, and this lasted for a very long time. And as they did so, their bodies became coarser still, and the difference in their looks became even greater. and the females developed sex organs, and the males developed male organs. And the women became excessively preoccupied with men, and the men became excessively preoccupied with women. Owing to this excessive preoccupation with each other, passion was aroused, and their bodies burnt with lust. There's a note in the commentaries explaining this biological differentiation into the sexes. And according to the commentary, it actually began with the necessary function of excretion. Once the food had developed to this coarse level of ordinary grain, the beings had to excrete their waste. Openings appeared in their body to do this, and then there gradually became a differentiation between male bodies and female bodies. Because before, the Brahma beings have no gender. So before this, there was no gender differentiation and there was no sex. Owing to this excessive preoccupation with each other, passion was aroused and their bodies burned with lust. And later, because of this burning, they indulged in sexual activity. But those who saw them indulging threw dust, ashes, or cow dung at them, crying, "Die, you filthy beast! How can one being do such things to another?" Just as today in some districts, when a daughter-in-law is let out, some people throw dirt at her, some ashes, and some cow dung, without realizing they are repeating an ancient observance. What was once considered bad form in those days is now considered good form. So I guess it was a custom at marriages at the time to throw ash or something on like we have throwing rice. Maybe throw ash on the couple or at least the bride. And here's the story at the origin of it. Beings who had not yet developed sexual differentiation were disgusted by the ones who did. How can you do this disgusting act to each other? And tried to drive them away by throwing clods of dirt at them or whatever. And those beings who in those days indulged in sex were not allowed into the village or town for 1 or 2 months. Accordingly, those who indulged for an excessively long period in such immoral practice began to build themselves dwellings so as to indulge under cover. This is the origin of houses and desire for seclusion and privacy, which before hadn't been an issue. It's kind of like the loss of innocence in the biblical story. When in the biblical story in the Garden of Eden, after the fall, for the first time Adam and Eve became ashamed of their nakedness and covered themselves with fig leaves. Now it occurs to one of these beings who is inclined to laziness, "Well now, why should I be bothered to gather rice in the evening for supper and in the morning for breakfast? Why shouldn't I gather it all at once, for both meals?" And he did so. Then another one came and said, "Come on, let's go rice gathering." "No need, my friend, I've gathered enough for both meals." Then the other, following his example, gathered enough rice for 2 days at a time, saying, "That should be about enough." Then another being came and said unto the second one, "Come, let us go rice gathering." "No need, my friend, I've gathered enough for 2 days. The same thing repeats up to 4 days and up to 8 days. However, when those beings made a store of rice and lived on that, husk powder and husk began to envelop the grain, and where it was reaped it did not grow again, and the cut place showed, and the rice grew in separate clusters. By overtaxing their food supply, they caused a further degeneration in the plant life, and it degenerated into the modern rice as we know it today that requires a lot of labor to get from the first planting to your rice pot. So I think this here is symbolic, or actually not very far from the actuality of the beginning of agriculture. Transition from hunting and gathering to agriculture. And when those beings came together lamenting, "Wicked ways have become rife amongst us. First we were mind-made, feeding on delight." And then all events are repeated down to the latest. Each change being said to be due to wicked and unwholesome ways. And the rice grows in separate clusters. So now let us divide up the rice into fields with boundaries. And so they did. So now the introduction of agriculture becomes the necessity of the invention of private property. And these things are seen as not advances, but as degenerations from a state of primitive innocence. Then Vaseta, one greedy-natured being, while watching over his own plot, took another plot that was not given to him and enjoyed the fruits of it. So they seized hold of him and said, "You've done a wicked thing, taking another's plot like that. Don't do ever such a thing again." "I won't," he said. But he did. The same thing again, a second and a third time. Again he was seized and rebuked, and some hit him with their fists, and some with stones, and some with sticks. And in this way, Vaseta, taking what was not given, and censuring, and lying, and punishment took their origin. So with private property, theft arises, crime arises, violence arises. Then those who came together and lamented the arising of these evil things among them, taking what was not given, censuring, lying, and punishment. And they said, "Suppose we were to appoint a certain being who would show anger where anger was due, censure those who deserved it, and banish those who deserved banishment, and in return we would grant him a share of the rice." So they went to one among them, who was the handsomest, the best looking, the most pleasant and capable, and asked him to do this for him in return for a share of the rice, and he agreed. So this is the beginning of government, which is seen as a kind of a necessary evil. It wouldn't be necessary if everyone behaved themselves, but because there's thieves and there's violence, we need somebody to be in charge here. And I find it's kind of amusing that when they elect or choose a leader, of the characteristics they look for, one of the last one mentioned is capable. The others are best looking, handsomest, most pleasant. It's kind of reminiscent of elections now. The people's choice is the name of Mahasamata, which is the regular title to be introduced. So this first leader was given the name of Mahasamata, and this is said to be the first king. And later Buddhist royalty in India concocted genealogies tracing their line all the way back to Mahasamata. And Mahasamata was the father of all the kings of India, according to their later genealogies. Lord of the Fields is the meaning of Katya, the second such title. So Katya, or Kshatriya in Sanskrit, is the name of the warrior caste, who were the aristocrats or landowners as well. And the king would, of course, always be a Katya. And etymology is given here as Lord of the Fields. The second such title, gladdens others with Dhamma, is the meaning of Raja. Now, these are kind of a bit far-fetched etymologies. This is a common thing in Pali. This kind of wordplay. The word Raja has some similarity to the word Rajati for rejoicing. So he's saying that the meaning of it is gladdens others with Dhamma. And then Vaseta, Vaseta is the origin of the class of Katyas in accordance with ancient titles that were introduced for them. They originated amongst these very same beings, like ourselves, no different, in accordance with Dhamma, not otherwise. So he's saying here, there isn't any special birth for the Katya class. It was a pragmatic decision of the people of the time that they needed somebody to keep order, so they established a king and then eventually a whole class of warriors whose function was to protect the community. But their origin is not some special creation, but they came out of the ordinary people originally. Dhamma is the best thing for people in this life and the next as well. And then he goes on to talk about the origin of the other castes. Then some of these beings thought, evil things have appeared amongst beings, such as taking what is not given, censuring, lying, punishment, and banishment. We ought to put aside evil and unwholesome things, and they did so. They put aside evil and unwholesome things is the meaning of Brahman. This is another far-fetched kind of stretch of wordplay, saying that they put away evil and unwholesome things is the meaning of Brahman, which is the first regular title to be introduced for such people. And they made leaf huts in forest places and meditated in them. With the smoking fire gone out, with pestle cast aside, gathering alms for their evening and morning meals, they went away to a village, town, or royal city to seek their food, and when they returned to their leaf huts to meditate, people saw this and noted how they meditated. They meditated is the meaning of Jayaka, which is the second regular title to be introduced. So he sees the origin of the Brahmins here as being like the Samanas. They were originally ascetics, living in leaf huts and meditating and seeking alms food. So very much like the ascetic tradition, or the Samana tradition. However, some of these beings, not being able to meditate in leaf huts, settled around towns and villages and compiled books. People saw them doing this and not meditating. Now those who do not meditate is the meaning of Ajayaka, which is a really kind of mischievous play on words, because it actually means like a learned Brahmin would be given this title, which is the third regular title to be introduced. At that time it was regarded as a low designation, but now it is the higher. The Brahmins who were well learned, they would get the title of Ajayaka. This then, Vasetta, is the origin of the class of Brahmins, in accordance with the ancient titles that were introduced for them. The origin was from among those very beings, like themselves, no different, and in accordance with Dhamma, not otherwise. And then, now he goes on to the origin of the merchant class, the Vesas. And then, Vasetta, some of these beings having paired off, adopted various trades, and this various is the meaning of Vesa, which came to be the regular title for such people. This then is the origin of the class of Vesas, in accordance with the ancient titles that were introduced for them. Their origin was from among these very same beings. Historically, the original Aryans, when they came into India, they brought the caste system with them. There were originally only 3 castes, and the Vesas were the lowest class, and they were mostly cattle herders, and the economy was based on livestock. Later they became the merchant class, and the Suddas, who were descended from the non-Aryan inhabitants of India, became conquered and established as the lowest class, or the Suddas. Now that's the historical account of the origin of the 4 castes, but here in the Sutta it goes on, and then Vaseta, those beings who remain went in for hunting. They are base who live by the chase, that is the meaning of Suddha, which came to be the regular title for such people. This then is the origin of the class of Suddas, in accordance with the ancient titles that were introduced for them. Their origin was among these very same beings. So he's seeing the Suddas as being hunters. Once the Aryans passed the Indus Valley and got into the Ganges, it probably were the people there were on a more primitive level. There was probably a lot of hunter-gatherers. So he sees the Suddas as being those who live by the chase. Maurice Walsh, in his footnotes here, he makes a kind of a comical observation from his British point of view. He says that I wonder how our British aristocrats would take this, because like hunting was sort of a privilege of the aristocrats in European society, and it's, in England you have like the fox hunt, right? It's an aristocratic game, and here it's like the lowest thing. But we see this in the Buddhist stories generally, like in the Jatakas, that hunters are always despised and like a very low kind of occupation. And then it came about that some Khattiya, dissatisfied with his own Dhamma, went forth from the home life into homelessness, thinking, I will become an ascetic, or in Pali a samana. And a Brahmin did likewise, and a Vesa did likewise, and so did a Suddha. And from these 4 classes, the class of ascetics, samanas, came into existence. Their origin was from these same beings, like themselves, no different, in accordance with Dhamma, not otherwise. So he's now in Indian society. There was outside the caste system were the samanas, were the religious seekers. And the Buddha is saying that they could come from any one of the 4 castes. This was always a tension between the Brahmins, who were hereditary priesthood, and the Samanas, who were individuals from any caste who went forth and practiced religious austerities. By the Orthodox Brahmins, this was considered to be kind of very, very heretical and unapproved. There's a story, I think it's in the Laws of Manu, in one of the Hindu texts, later period, when the caste system was becoming more rigid. There's a story of one of the incarnations of Vishnu who came across the Sutta doing Hatha Yoga, standing on his head, and he killed him for breaking the caste laws. Chopped his head off. And so Visita Aggañña, who has had a bad life and has, in body, speech, and thought, who has had wrong view, will, in consequence of such views and deeds, at the breaking up of the body after death, be reborn in a state of loss, an ill fate, the downfall, the hell state. So too will a Brahma, a Vasa, or a Suddha. Likewise, a Aggañña, who has led a good life in body, speech, and thought, and who has had a right view, in consequence of such right view and deeds, at the breaking up of his body after death, will be reborn in a good destiny, in the heaven state. So too will a Brahma, a Vasa, or a Suddha. And so a Aggañña, who has performed deeds of both kinds, in body, speech, and thought, and his view is mixed, will, in consequence of such mixed views and deeds, at the breakup of the body after death, experience both pleasure and pain. So too will a Brahman, a Vasa, or a Suddha. An Aggañña who is restrained in body, speech, and thought, and who has developed the 7 requisites of enlightenment, will attain to parinibbana in this very life. So too will a Brahma, a Vasa, or a Suddha. And Vaseta, whoever of these 4 castes, as a monk, becomes Arahant, destroyed the corruptions, done what is to be done, laid down the burden, attained to the goal, completely destroyed the fetter of becoming, and become liberated by the highest insight, he is declared to be chief among those in accordance with Dhamma and not otherwise. Vaseta, it was the Brahma Sanan Kumara who spoke the verse, "The Aggañña is best among those who value clan. He with knowledge and conduct is the best of gods and men." The verse was rightly sung, not wrongly spoken, not wrongly connected with profit, not unconnected. I too say, Vaseta, the Aggañña is best among those who value clan. He with knowledge of conduct is best of gods and men. And thus the Lord spoke, and Vaseta and Bharaja were delighted and rejoiced at his words. So this last little bit, I think we can take from this that in this critique of the caste system, the Buddha was not actually seeking the end or the abolishment of the caste system. And we see this elsewhere, that he'll talk about the caste system. He wants to make clear that it's not a divine institution, but it's a human pragmatic arrangement that has its value as a way of organizing society, but it's not an absolute value. It's not a divinely inspired value, but a pragmatic human one. And he makes the point always that the Aggaññas should be considered the top caste, not the Brahmins. The Brahmins usurped that position. So the verse of Sanam Kumara, the Aggañña is 2 lines in the verse. The first one is mundane, dealing with ordinary affairs on the conventional level. The Aggañña is on top. But then he goes on to the higher level, or the more transcendent level, and he says, but he with knowledge and conduct, Vijja and Charana, Vijja Charana Sampati is in the chant. He with knowledge and conduct is the best of gods and men. So that always trumps any ordinary, mundane, pragmatic arrangement humans make. The important thing is the keeping of morality and the developing of the mind. and the highest status is accorded to one who has attained to arahantship. So this sutta deals with the origin of the world system, the origin of the human race, and the origin of the caste system and human society. It's interesting as taken as a whole in a number of ways. One is that it does imply a evolution, or more strictly speaking, a devolution. There's a change, continual change from the beginning to now. It isn't a one-off immediate creation like in Genesis. So it does acknowledge change happening. And it ties the level of the beings with their morality. And this becomes even more clear in another sutta that's immediately precedes this one and kind of paired with it usually, is the Cakkavatti Sutta, that deals with the future. Like this one deals with the past, the other sutta deals with the future. And it talks about human beings going through cycles of declining morality together with declining lifespan. And human beings at the beginning, when they first were in this kind of Brahma stage, were said to have a lifespan of 80,000 years, and then that degenerates through the increasing accumulation of defilements and wrongdoing. It declines to 10 years. And we're said to be on a downslope now. And then after it bottoms out at 10 years, there'll be a 7-day period of, they call the sword time, when everybody acts like wild beasts and starts killing each other. And there'll be very few survivors, and they'll emerge and say, why don't we just stop killing each other? And so they take the first precept, and that's the first moral act that begins the upcycle. And every generation they acquire new precepts and new good morality. It's the reverse, the mirror image of the downslope. And every generation increases in lifespan until they get back up to 80,000 years. And the next time human lifespan is at 80,000 years, Metteyya Buddha is supposed to come. So this is a mythological framework that explains the origins of human beings. And one very important concept to take away from this is that the origin of humans from the Abhisara Brahma realm through the agency of becoming entangled in sense desire. When we practice jhana meditation, we are elevating our consciousness to a Brahma level. And there's a deep sense taken from these myths that the state of mind of being in jhana is actually not something new or additional to our consciousness, but is a natural, native, primordial state of mind. In a way, we're actually just remembering. We're remembering what it's like to be an Abhisara Brahma. So I'll leave it at that. That's the Aggañña Sutta, number 27, Digha Nikaya.